Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. And I've been here a little over a year. And we try to have quarterly town hall meetings. And I've never made those mandatory because I typically figure that if people are interested, they care, they want to know what's going on within the organization, that they'll show up. But these sessions, these training sessions, we made mandatory because what we're going to talk about today is important. This is about transforming our organization and really not just becoming focused on patient safety, but as I'll speak about, in becoming a high reliability organization, which changes everything. But to kick the session off, I'd like to share with you a video that I found several years ago, and it's extremely powerful and one that I think lays a good foundation for what we'll be talking about today. So
the relationship you develop with the patient is one of the most loving, giving, honest relationships you can have. That person has entrusted you. You shared the worst and you shared the best. I grew up wanting to be a nurse, never wanted to be anything else. I was probably 3 years out of nursing school, and I was working in a cardiac intensive care unit. One of my patients had suffered a large heart attack, and I was in our med room, which was open to our nursing station. And I was laughing and talking with my coworkers and not really paying a lot of attention to what I was drawing up in this syringe. I went into her room and started injecting the medication, and one of the nurses from the desk called out and said, "Gwen, look at your monitor." And her blood pressure had just plummeted. I looked down at my syringe and I realized I had double dosed her on this very powerful blood pressure medication. I was crying, and the patient actually took my hand and comforted me and said, "Honey, everything will be okay." I'm standing there in the back of the room watching my teammates try to salvage a patient that I harmed. I had potentially killed another human being simply because I wasn't paying attention. It was one of the worst nights of my life. I'll never forget it. We were able to stabilize her. It took about 4 hours. Stayed there about 6 days, and then she did go home. I questioned whether I was fit to be a nurse. Was I morally fit to take care of other human beings if I could be so careless? So I went into grief counseling. I felt renewed. I felt like, okay, this is my fate, to be not only a nurse, but a champion for patient safety. We built one of the first quality circles in my unit, and we looked at medication administration, how we cared for patients, fatigue in nurses. And when a nurse made a mistake, we had a team that would talk with her. We experienced less errors. We developed more processes around checking. We built in redundancy into our systems that we didn't normally have. It took about 3 years to get all of that set up. She came back to our unit about 6 months later, and she was dying. Her heart was so damaged that it just could not sustain her. And I said, "Remember were you in the hospital before? I'm the nurse that gave you too much medicine." And I said, "I want to tell you how sorry I am, but I also want to tell you how much I learned." And she reached up and kind of cupped my hands in hers and said, "Honey, I told you it was going to be okay. And as long as you learned something, that was great." Her name was Shirley. And every time I start a new project, I think about Shirley. She has inspired me for a lot of my 30 years in nursing.
So powerful. I don't think today marks the 10th time in this session that I viewed that video, and I'm always moved by what I see there, because in our industry, what we do dangerous, risky things here every day, and it only takes a moment to end up with a lifetime of regret. To Ms. Cox's credit, she turned that experience into a passion and has largely spent most of the rest of her nursing career focusing on patient safety and equality improvement. Part of our aim here in this organization, again, kind of going back to the idea of transforming, it is becoming a high reliability organization. What does that mean? Well, high reliability HROs, high reliability organizations, focus on these things that you'll see on the screen. And first of all, you design systems, processes, procedures, the way you go about doing things. You standardize those in such a way that you're doing things as much as possible the same way every time. Supports the decisions of your staff. It provides opportunities for them to give you feedback. You learn on an ongoing basis, and you change and you get better. HROs encourage more learning of being mindful of every decision and every action that you take, because those all have consequences, some greater than others. We're going to mention this phrase, situational awareness, a lot today. Situational awareness of improving and of knowing what is going on around you, knowing what's going on in the environment, knowing what's going on with your patients, knowing what's going on in your work environment. And when you identify at-risk patients, to lessen that risk and to escalate it until the patient is safe, until you know that the patient is safe. You manage by prediction. You have plans in place for both the expected as well as for the unexpected as much as you can. And then the last focus is looking at the human factors. We're all human beings. We all learn in different ways. We all interact in different ways. And as you design your procedures, as you design the processes and systems that you employ in your facility, you take those human factors into account. And when those human factors could lead to error, you try to figure out a way to minimize them as much as possible. Keeping the patient safe, keeping the family safe, keeping our own coworkers and our visitors safe as well. So, high reliability organizations almost universally share 5 primary characteristics. Number one, there's a preoccupation with failure. Everyone in the organization is focused on errors and on the near misses, because you learn from those, and then you figure out how to prevent them from happening again. Attention to detail is absolutely crucial to be successful in detail in every sense of the word. And it's not just finding and fixing problems isn't just managers and administration's responsibility. It becomes everybody's responsibility to identify those issues that could lead to problems and could make your patients unsafe. And the last part of this sentence, encouraged and supported by leadership. And I hope all of you and the others that have sat in this classroom over the last two days that we've done these trainings is a testament to the importance and the credence that I give to what we're trying to do here, because I feel a moral obligation that in our facility that we're going to keep our patients safe and that we're not going to harm the patient while we're rendering medical care to them. The second characteristic that HROs all share, there is a reluctance to simplify interpretations, basically meaning you're constantly asking the why question. In root cause analysis, which is a technique for trying to drill down and determine why the problem occurs or exists, there's a technique called the 5 whys, and it states that if you ask why 5 times, that usually by the time you get to the 5th why, you will have come to the answer. Sometimes it doesn't even take 5 times. You want to leverage new thinking. You want to bring people in that have diverse experience, because a lot of times, and I know this is true of me, when I get too close to a circumstance or a situation that I'm working on, I will kind of lose my objectivity, my perspective. I tend to get a little bit of tunnel vision, get a little bit myopic, and so in those times, I try to rally and bring others alongside to help me see what is outside of my peripheral vision, and to help me make sure that I'm taking into account and I'm considering everything that I need to take into account. Key characteristic number 3, there's a sensitivity to operations. There's an ongoing concern about the unexpected happening. When you have a process where there's potential for harm to a patient, you close those loopholes. Once again, we come across this phrase, maintaining situational awareness of what is going on around us, what's going on with our patients, what's going on with our work environment. A really key point is encouraging your workforce and having teams of people that will speak up, not step over a problem, not push it aside. If they see something that they think could be risky, that could cause patients harm, they will speak up, so that you can take a look at whatever that is. It may turn out that it's not actually a problem, but it's better to look at it and analyze it and make that determination rather than simply ignore it and sweep it under the rug and then all of a sudden something happens. And then you pay attention to the front line. The people that are on the front line are the experts, the nurses, care techs, support staff. It's remarkable a lot of times what you can learn from the people that are really out there in the trenches every day. I spent 12 and a half years in my career earlier in an organization that I was responsible for both an acute care hospital as well as a long-term care facility. And I quickly learned that some of the most reliable people to kind of help us keep situational awareness of what was going on with our nursing home residents were the certified nursing assistants. And the reason why is because they spent more time with our nursing home residents than anyone. They, in many cases, were feeding those residents, giving them feeding assistance. They were bathing them, helping them get dressed in the morning or undressed and ready for bed at night. They spent a lot of time with those residents. And when one of those CNAs came to us and said, a particular resident doesn't seem quite right, there's something that's going on with her or him, something has changed, we reacted to that immediately because they typically had something of a sixth sense, it seemed like, that they knew that something was going on. So you pay attention to those folks that are right there on the front line. Characteristic number 4 is a commitment to resilience. The last sentence on this slide, errors will not disable us. We recognize that people are not perfect, mistakes will be made, things are going to go wrong that we didn't predict or that we didn't anticipate, but we're going to quickly identify those issues, we're going to mitigate it, we're going to put some structures in place so that we can respond and minimize any harm, if any, that it may cause. And then finally, number 5, there's a deference to expertise. You find the people in the midst of a situation, the people who are most capable and have the most expertise to immediately step in to help you to kind of resolve a situation in the moment. Again, recognizing that those closest to the front line are the experts. And we will empower our folks around here in those circumstances and those situations to do what is necessary to mitigate harm and minimize it as much as possible. So some examples of high reliability industries and organizations. Aviation. Pilots are trained to, there is redundancy, they have checklist after checklist after checklist. They are absolutely laser-like focused on safety and whether they're in the military, whether they fly commercially. So just some statistics. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics in 2019, here in the United States, there were well over 21 million flight hours that year. Those are hours where there was an aircraft of any type in the air with people aboard that flight. And in that whole of that year, out of that many flight hours, there were only 414 fatalities, 227 serious injuries. Not that anyone wants to dismiss those numbers, but when you look at the volume of flying that was going on, it's pretty impressive. I've been on commercial flights before a couple of times when the aircraft got held up at the gate, couldn't take off because of a mechanical issue. And when we waited, the chief mechanic eventually came on board with a clipboard, had a complete, thorough report for the pilot and the co-pilot of exactly what the problem was and what had been done to correct it. Gave the pilot and the co-pilot the opportunity to be able to ask questions and feel comfortable that this aircraft that they were about to lift off the ground, loaded with passengers as well as crew, was safe to fly. And they all signed off on it. Another example, another industry is nuclear power. We have nuclear power plants around the United States, and nuclear power is not something that you want to treat casually. We've seen catastrophic accidents in Chernobyl in Russia years ago, and most recently in Japan several years ago. Once again, there is a high level of attention paid by the people that work in those plants in following procedures and checklists and making sure that they are doing everything in a standardized way, the same way, best practices and all that they do. In 2019, here in the United States in the nuclear power industry, there were no accidents that resulted in lost time, injury, fatalities, even restricted work. So then the question, though, arises in the healthcare industry, well, do we really have a problem? So in 2016, the Leapfrog Group, which is an organization that is committed to the advancement of patient safety here in the United States, engaged Johns Hopkins Institute for Patient Safety and Quality to do a study. And after the study was completed, the data showed that in 2016 that there were an estimated 206,000 avoidable deaths per year in hospitals. Avoidable patients that were harmed as a result of the care that they received or medical errors, not necessarily because of their disease state or because of the injury that brought them into the hospital. So 3 years later, they repeated the study, and clearly there had been improvement. But once again, there were 161,000 avoidable deaths in that particular year. So let's translate that into and put it into perspective. Boeing manufactures one of their aircraft in their 777 series is the 300, which has a total seating capacity of crew as well as passengers of just under 400. So at 161,000 avoidable deaths at the rate that we're killing people in hospitals, that would be the equivalent of 1.2 Boeing 777-300s crashing into the ground every day with all aboard, every passenger being a fatality. That would raise concern. I think Congress would probably convene some hearings. There would be a lot of excitement. There would be a lot of attention to that. But it's happening in the healthcare industry, in the hospital industry, and it's up to us to do our part to do something about it. So I can tell you that this safety program that we're putting in place has the full support of our board of directors. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that if you sit on the board of directors of a hospital, ultimately the buck stops there. You, as a member of the governing body, are accountable for whatever goes on. In my role as a member of senior leadership, I share the same accountability. Not to mention the fact, as I said earlier, I think this is just, I feel like I have a moral obligation to try to advance this in our organization. Randy's going to get up and talk about this in a few minutes, but we will operate from a fair and just culture here. And kind of in the nutshell, what that means is that what we're trying to do here is not about trying to identify and get rid of imperfect people. What we're trying to identify and get rid of are imperfect processes, systems, and things that we do that could lead to harm to a patient. I happen to believe that you cannot say that your hospital provides high quality of care if you do not have a focus on patient safety. Those are inseparable in my view, and when you begin to focus on patient safety, and I have seen this firsthand, it also improves the quality of care. It improves everything. This whole notion of becoming a high reliability organization isn't just isolated and limited into the clinical areas, but it begins to affect everything that you do in your financial area, in the support departments, in the dietary department, in environmental services. There's not an area that isn't touched and isn't affected by this. It's the right thing to do. It just is. And our goal in this is zero harm, which sounds lofty, but this is important enough when you're talking about the welfare of your patients, their very lives. You're not going to shoot for fractions of percentages on this one. Your goal always has to be zero. The elements of our program that we're going to talk about today, and this is kind of what makes this up. Saria is going to introduce what we call the Air Prevention Toolkit. Now, these aren't tangible material tools, but they are techniques for communication, and they are ways to stimulate critical thinking so that as people make decisions, as they encounter situations, we want to train people to begin to use these tools in such a way that it becomes so organic that over time you find yourself using them regardless of what your job is, and you don't even realize it. In March, we introduced a surveillance and monitoring system called RLDavis. It's an online platform. Everybody here should have access to it. And the idea of it is that if you or are involved in some irregular event, if it is a medication error, even if you were the one that committed it, if there's a patient fault that you observed or were associated with, if there's anything that's out of the ordinary, we want every member of our staff to go into RLDavis and someone report that, because it allows us to track and to trend and to see where we may have issues. If we observe through RLDavis that we're having a similar error, let's say, again, we talk a lot about medication errors, but if we see several nurses that have made the same medication error, that tells me that we most likely have a procedure that is flawed in some way. And so we want to understand why that's happening and get rid of that and correct it. So we want people to have the courage to understand that they can, if I make a mistake, I can go into RLDavis. I made an error, here's what it was. Because I will tell you right now, you will not lose your job here for making a mistake. We're all human. Everybody makes mistakes. We want to try to help everybody get better, to figure out why the error occurred. Let's see if we can figure out how to prevent it from happening again. Every morning at 9 o'clock, our department leaders gather in this room for a patient safety huddle. It lasts about 15 minutes. The purpose of that huddle is to give every department the opportunity to report on anything that might be going on in their area that could affect the care of our patients. If there's a piece of equipment in the laboratory that's not working and it needs to be worked on, we've got somebody, we're waiting. Okay, so it may very well be that particular tests are not going to be available for a while. We want everybody to know that if the chemistry analyzer is down, we've got issues, and so we need to let the emergency room, we need to let the clinics know, because that's going to delay getting those tests done on those patients. So it is about situational awareness, and that's what those safety huddles are designed to do. Our aim is to then have patient safety huddles at the department level, so that if our department leaders learn of something in the morning huddle that they attend that needs to be broadcast further out, they can go back to their departments and let them know. I learned in patient safety huddle today that our generator is going to be down for a couple of hours this afternoon, so I want my entire staff to know that so that we can plan accordingly in case the electricity were to go off at the same time that the generators. We will be developing a safety leadership team. In the huddles every day, our focus is on those patient safety issues that we expect will be resolved within a short period of time, perhaps 24 to 48 hours. But sometimes you have safety issues that arise that require a multidisciplinary approach to be able to address them. And the example that I've used in all of these sessions, when I was at Admiral Community Hospital, we began to notice issues with prisoners from the correctional facilities in the Admiral area that were transported to our hospital for care. We weren't having issues with the inmates, we were having issues with the guards that were charged with guarding them and observing them. We would take an inmate, for example, back into our radiology department. Our CT scanner was kind of in a remote, isolated area. The staff that we had working back there was all female. These were male inmates, and the technician would take the inmate to the back to do a CT scan, and the guard that was assigned and sent by the correctional facility to guard that inmate didn't have eyes on. They were fiddling with their phone, they had their earbuds in, they were listening to music, they were distracted instead of doing what they needed to do. So our safety leadership team got together, we requested a meeting with the wardens of the correctional facilities. We met with them so that we could convey to them our concerns and our complaints about that situation. They enlightened us on some things that we didn't know, and we both the prisons and the hospital, we went back and adjusted our policies and procedures accordingly as to what was realistic. And then finally, as we get this program in place, we hope to identify patient safety coaches. These are frontline people that we see not just talk the talk for patient safety, but that actually live it out. People that can coach their coworkers, they can kind of advance this whole narrative in their department. Many times they will probably be a source for someone who sees a problem. They may be the first person that an employee comes to and says, I'm concerned that we may have an issue in this particular area, and they kind of sound the warning with them. A little bit of vocabulary, and these terms will become pretty familiar to everybody. What is an adverse event? An adverse event, simply stated, is harm from medical care rather than from an underlying disease. So when we are cared for a patient and the patient is harmed as a result of the care that we provide. Preventable adverse events is harm that results from error or a failure to apply the standard of care. The care falls below that expected standard, and or some strategy that you have put in place to prevent that from that type of error. An ameliorable adverse event, you couldn't prevent the harm, but if you had applied different care, it might have lessened the degree of harm. A near miss is an unsafe situation. You can't really distinguish it from a preventable adverse event. except for the outcome. Perhaps it touched the patient, it got to the patient, hazardous situation crosses the patient's path, but the patient doesn't really experience harm either because of just sheer luck or because there was early detection and you were able to lessen the degree of the harm. And then finally, a great catch. You have a chain of events that has been triggered, you're heading toward a disaster or potential disaster, and that event could lead to patient harm or even death, but some action by someone breaks that cycle, breaks that chain of events so that that harm or the death doesn't take place. Any questions?
For those of you that don't know me, I think I know both of you guys. Sometimes I don't see y'all all the time. I'm Suri, I'm the Chief Nursing Officer here, and I'm going to talk about error prevention. So Mr. Tanner has told us where we want to be, so let's talk about how we get there. So there are 5 proven safety behaviors or communication skills that we can use that are proven in these high reliability organizations to cause zero harm or to have 0 events. And we want to shoot for the stars. We want to have 0 events. I'll give you an example. We deliver babies here and we do a great job. We do a great job at that, right? We have a 99%, not really, but in theory, 99% rate of not dropping babies. So that means 99 out of 100 times we get it right. But do you want your baby to be the one baby that we drop? No. So 99, even though it looks great, sounds great, it's not great. We need 0. We need to be 100% on no harm. So a safety culture is a performance reliability culture that results in 0 events of harm and an overall performance excellence. And who doesn't want to be excellent? Our first behavior is pay attention to detail. We have an acronym that is STAR, makes it easy for you to remember. It's stop, think, act, and review. So you want to pause for a few minutes, 1 to 2 seconds. You want to focus on your attention on the task at hand. Think about or visualize the act that you're about to do, and then act on that task or do that task. Check, in the review stage, you want to check for the desired results. There are hundreds of things that we do inside our organization every day that we could use the STAR acronym. I've listed a few that are just popular that we use every day. Medication administration is one. In the video that we seen earlier, had she paid attention to detail and had somebody check her work, she would not have made that fatal mistake. Entering data. When I enter vital signs or data into a patient's chart, when you guys do that, it's important that we get it right. If we enter the wrong data and we start making clinical decisions based off of something that is incorrect, you see the ripple effect that begins to happen. Sending an email with an attachment or just an email in general, any kind of communication that you do, we do this in administration and management all the time. Hey, can you check my email for accuracy? We don't want to put anything out there that's incorrect. Adding a value to a spreadsheet. If you miss a decimal point in your checkbook, it's detrimental to your banking account. Same thing in a hospital. We need our budget to be right. We need to do dosage calculations correct. There are calculations in the lab that we have to do, and those have to be accurate. We need to communicate clearly. There are a couple of ways that we can do that here. One is 3-way repeat back, and the other one is 3-way read back. So in the repeat back model, I as the sender give you a task or a communication that I send to you. Receiver, you would acknowledge that communication and repeat it back to me, and I as the sender would then say, yes, that is correct, or no, that is not correct. An example would be Tylenol. Suri, I want you to give Tylenol 500 milligrams by mouth to the patient in 3:15. I, as the receiver, would say, so you want me to give Tylenol 500 milligrams by mouth to the patient in 3:15. And then the sender would say, yes, that is correct. If it was incorrect, they would say that. Read back is written information. So if the lab calls to give me a result and I write it down, I need to read that lab back to them or order, whatever the case may be. Do not rely on memory. Write it down. I tell my staff all the time, please write that down. If you don't write this down, I am not going to remember it. To continue on communicating clearly, we need to use Finite Clarification. Have you ever been on the phone with customer service and you're trying to talk to them between accents, noise in the background, things going on? You can't understand them and they can't understand you. There are a lot of words, letters, and sounds that sound just alike. So, example, medication, Inderol and Adderall. They're two totally different medications. They treat patients in different manners, and they have different dosages. But if you hear in my accent that I said Inderol instead of Adderall, that could be a problem for your patient. So, a way to get around that is Finite Clarification. It's a good practice to use for sound-alike words. When you communicate verbally, you're going to say the letter and then follow it with a word that begins with that letter. These that I have listed are nationally recognized. If you watch any police show, you're around any police officers, you like FBI, CSI, anything like that that you see. I'm married to a cop, so in our house we use this a good bit. I don't, he does. Almost speaks to our children in this manner. But these are nationally recognized. You don't have to use these. If you can't remember that C is Charlie and you're trying to convey something, but you like cake, then you can say C, I, and cake. You're just trying to communicate clearly and spell out the words that sound alike. Handoff is one of the most important things we do here. We hand off all the way across our system. We hand off nurse to nurse. We hand off shift to shift. We hand off department to department. There is an acronym that we can use, SFAR, that will help with this in nursing, and I use a lot of nursing examples because I've been a nurse for 21 years, but this is every department in the hospital. This is an easy way to get your information across. When you have to call a doctor in the middle of the night and wake him up, he's not usually the friendliest, and he wants to know what's going on, he or she, and how to treat it. So give him as much information as possible. Situation, who and what are you calling about? The immediate problem, and then what are your concerns? Your background review is all the information that makes that pertinent. Your environment, patient status, their lab results, the most recent vital signs, anything that the physician may need or the person that you're communicating to make an informed decision. Assessment, this is your view of the situation. You need to say, hey, this is a problem and we need to do something now. And then your recommendation, what do you recommend for me to do? In the middle of the night, that's going to be very helpful to a physician. If it's not the right thing, he or she will tell you that, but at least they have information enough to make a decision. And continued handoff effectively. Clarifying questions are very important. Mr. Tanner does a great job of this. When you are in high-risk situations, you have information that's incomplete or you have something that's just not clear, you need to ask questions, and you can ask those questions so that they don't seem like you're being derogatory or defensive. A lot of times it's our human nature to be defensive, and if we're in a high-risk situation, there's a lot of things going on, and you start asking questions, somebody may see that as, why are they asking me so many questions? You can diffuse all of that by simply starting your question with, I need to ask some clarifying questions. That says, hey, you're communicating, it's not anything you've really done wrong, but I'm just not understanding what you're telling me, so let's clarify that so we're all on the same page, okay? Speak up for safety. Critical thinking requires a questioning attitude. As healthcare professionals, we are nosy by nature because we're supposed to be. It is our job to question what we see. That's how we figure out what's going on. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. Gut instinct is absolutely important. We call it the spidey sense at my house. So if you have that little thing that says, this just doesn't seem right, speak up for that because it probably isn't right. There's something that you need to question. Ask yourself, does it seem like it makes sense to me? Does it fit with what I know, and is it what I expected to see? my experience is not the same as your experience. We've all been in different situations. And if we're in a situation that I've seen before and we've used a technique that's worked, we need to speak up for that, regardless of your title, what department you work in, or who you're dealing with. If it's a problem and you think we can handle it differently, you've seen it work in the past, you've got to speak up and escalate those safety concerns. You can do that by simply saying, hey, before we go any further, I need some clarity. I do not understand why we're doing this or how we're going to do it, and I need you to clarify that for me so that I have a better understanding. In healthcare, we have to have each other's back. If we're really going to be safety-minded throughout our organization, then everybody has to be on the same team. We all have to be working in the same direction and moving towards safety, patient safety. We need to check each other's work, calculations. Again, in the beginning, when we watched the movie, had she had somebody cross-check her work, there's a potential that we would not have the medication error that she caused. Point out unintended slips and lapses. We do chart checks on the night shift in nursing service. If I do a chart check and I realize that somebody has put the wrong lab work on a chart or they have charted incorrectly on a patient, I need to fix that immediately because it is a safety concern, but I also need to let the person know that made the mistake that that's been made. And the reason is because we need to ensure that we don't do that again. And if we just fix it for each other without having each other's back and talking about it, it's going to happen again. Point out work conditions. If housekeeping has mopped and cleaned an area and maybe they didn't have a wet floor sign, they had to go get it, and then I come through with the patient or somebody comes through the patient and you know that the floor is wet, then say that the floor is wet, because if I slip and fall, the patient slips and falls, then we have patient injury. Coach each other. Encourage and praise one another when we do safe things for patients or safe and productive behaviors. We need that encouragement here. We have a lot of things that we do that are in a negative light because we're dealing with sick patients. Everybody needs a little praise and encouragement. We do that in our safety huddles by doing great catches. And what a great catch is hey, I want to brag on Chase. He's done a great job. He's stopped a patient from harm, and this is how he done it. On the flip side of that, we have to be comfortable enough here in our organization, and that's where we're doing this fair and just culture, to say, hey, that's not safe for a patient and we can't do that. And if we are in a situation that y'all speak up for safety and somebody is not willing to listen to you, then you need to escalate that to the next person and you need to do it right then. Don't wait till Monday when they get back. Go ahead and take care of that then. Lastly, patient safety takes everybody in this room. If we don't wake up every day and say, today my goal is to keep our patients safe, then we're not going to be able to do that. It takes everybody in this room to keep our patients safe. Any questions? Randy.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
My name is Randy Stembridge. I'm your Human Resources Representative. And I'm here to talk to you about something that is one of my favorite things, and it fits perfectly with the rest of our program. It's called Fair and Just Culture. And we're going to talk about the who, what, where, when, and why of that. It's been around for quite some time. It was created by a gentleman by the name of David Marks. And David Marks is an attorney and an engineer who was generally called when there was a traffic-related disaster. A plane crashed, train derailed, a ship sank or something like that. He was the guy that was called in to investigate that situation. And he said that when he would get to a site, that people would ask him the wrong question. They would ask him, David, who is at fault here? Who is to blame for this tragedy? He said, that's the wrong first question. He said, what we need to ask is, David, why did this happen? so that we can fix the problem so that it won't happen again. So he created the fair and just culture model that we use today. And he says that we need a balance of learning from our errors and events and managing the performance of individual employees. It's one thing to report errors and events, and that is critical. We're going to talk more about that. It's one thing to report them and analyze them and do root cause analysis and all those kind of things, but we also have to share our lessons learned. The best way to learn things sometimes is to get in right behind somebody who's already doing it. And again, if a person makes an error, we're not looking to blame them, we're looking to learn from them to get better at what we do. So he talks about there are 4 evils. I don't know if they're all evil or not, and we'll talk more about these in detail in just a few minutes. But he's talking about human error, and this is where you should have done something other than what you did. Just a swing and a miss. Negligent conduct is failure to recognize a risk that it should have been recognized. Reckless conduct is conscious disregard of visible significant risk. And then knowing violations, and this one may be evil. This is where you know that what you're going to do is going to harm someone, harm a patient, or something like that. And we'll talk more about those a little bit in detail. Why are we doing this? It fits perfectly with our patient safety program. And there's some discussion about, it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing. Should the fair and just culture come first and then the patient safety program, or vice versa? Companies do it both ways. But we need to have reasonable internal expectations to help improve the processes that we currently have in place. And hopefully, this is a comforting thought, we're not expecting perfection. That is not a reasonable expectation. Gilbert Lopez Meyer, who is an associate of Mr. Marks, talks about the chicken and egg thing, but he talks about that gathering data, people reporting information, and setting a just culture so that you're not worried about losing your job, you're not worried about being punished, but you're just worried about improving the processes. That makes the foundation and leads to an efficient patient safety program. So again, reporting is a key factor. We have a mechanism in place so that you can report at any time electronically, but people make excuses and say, I don't know why it's important. Nobody saw me. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I just drew up the wrong meds and I disposed of it properly. Nobody knew it happened. So why should I report that? Because we need to know why it happened. What was your thought process? What led up to that? So that it doesn't happen again. And it certainly doesn't want it to happen in a situation that is then passed on to the patient. And back to the lady who began our program. She was distracted. She drew up the wrong medication. And she potentially, you notice her words, she potentially could have killed that person or harmed that person. People sometimes say they don't know how to report. We've given you, and you have a mechanism in place to report this. People say it's too hard to report, or they're afraid of reporting. Don't be afraid to do that. There's no going to be any repercussions from doing that. It's, again, not about punishing the person, but it is about accountability. It is okay for our supervisors and our managers and our leaders and our coworkers to hold us accountable for what we signed up to do. We're not worried about punishing people, but if there is coaching or feedback or even corrective action that needs to happen, again, it doesn't mean that you have to lose your job. It just means that you get the opportunity to get better. The best way for you to be held accountable is to hold yourself accountable for what you signed up to do. Sari mentioned this already. Who does it take to get this done? It takes us all. So let's spend just a minute here on those evils. Human error, again, it's just a swing and a miss. Inadvertent situation, you did something that you didn't intend to do. We need to expect those errors to occur and plan for those, and don't be one failure away from harm. That's a key factor. human error responses should be compassion and understanding first. If you have a new employee and they make an error, and like Ms. Cox said in the beginning, she questioned her ability. She questioned her calling in life to be a nurse because of one error. Wouldn't it have been more wonderful if somebody had come along beside her and said, hey, it's not going to always be this way. You have talent, you have gifts. Let's focus on what happened and fix it. So the reckless and negligent conduct, key word here, this is where you choose to do something in a way that unintentionally can impose a chance for harm to occur. Easy example. How many of us talk on our cell phones while we're driving? Even though it's against the law, we do it anyway. And we say, oh, nothing's ever happened, I'm fine, but it's still, there's a chance for harm. Sometimes we get complacent because nothing's ever happened. But you don't want to be the first one for something to happen to. Sometimes we try to attempt more than what we can do. So how do we look at that situation? We assess what the motivation was. Why did you do this? What led you to that point? And then we coach to improve. Which we didn't say terminate or corrective action or anything unless that's necessary, but we coach to improve. Knowing violations, this is where, this one may be evil, depending on how you look at it. If you know what you're doing is going to cause harm, then that's a whole different ballgame. We have a case study that we look at a lot of times where it talks about a nurse in another city, and she called herself the angel of death. She said, my patients are going to die. By the time they get to our unit, they're going to die. So I'm going to let them die with dignity. I'm going to give them so much medication that they don't feel any pain. And she was warned not to do that. That's a violation of so many things that you just can't do that, of course. So, but she continued to do it, and so she was disciplined accordingly. So sometimes there's corrective action, sometimes those things do lead to termination. But that's not the goal for any of this. The goal is to help us get better. Healthcare is a little bit behind in this. Other industries, and Doug mentioned those earlier, we're catching up rapidly. Nursing Magazine weighed in and said it's important to understand that a just culture, even though it's non-punitive, doesn't release us from our accountability. We need to seek to distinguish between the errors and breaches of duty and respond accordingly. So, in light of all that, we have created a policy. We have a policy in place that will be revealed to all of you very shortly. And it pretty much says we understand that competent professionals make mistakes. You are competent professionals. You wouldn't be sitting here if you weren't. But we're going to swing and miss. We're going to make mistakes sometimes. But we want everybody to know that people are not going to be subjected to punishment right out of the chute. We're going to look at the situation. I'm going to show you how we're going to do that before we take any action. This policy allows anyone to report, whether it's a nurse, a doctor, someone in human resources, or the guy that fills up the Coke machine. If we see an error, we can report it. If there are system modifications or things that we need to change, we'll certainly do that. Again, we want to get better. So how do we do this? We have this, and you have a copy of this here. It's called a Performance Management Decision Guide that gives us the ability to address all the situations in the arena and look at them separately and come to a collective decision together. This is what it looks like. It's a little bit hard to read up here, but it's very simple. It shows us where to start. We don't have to worry about where to begin the investigation, and we look at the different tests that are there, simple yes or no questions that lead us to possible actions to consider. And if you read those across the bottom, you'll see that all of those are done in the light most favorable to the employees. So where does this take us? It keeps us in line with our mission, vision, our standards of conduct. It gives us the opportunity to provide coaching, counseling where necessary, and make sure that mistakes and errors are always reported. And then when we get there being a high reliability organization, our patient satisfaction will be at the highest levels. Our employee satisfaction will be at the highest levels. We won't have recruiting issues. We won't have open positions because everybody will want to work here. We are the best. We're going to be the best. We're going to continue to focus on being the best. Our overall scores will be high. Our HCAP scores will be high. We will show this community that we are the best. And I want to leave you with a quote from, I mentioned earlier that healthcare is a little bit behind some of the other industries in doing fair and just culture, but Nursing Magazine said this: the ultimate outcome in a shift to a just culture is honest employees who actively report errors and near misses to improve safety. The shift also produces consistent leadership behaviors that result in increased employee satisfaction. By differentiating errors from risk-taking behaviors, hospitals can promote improvement to move healthcare to the highest ranks of high reliability organizations. Thank you for what you do. Any questions at all? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randy and Sheree. I know Randy just asked the question, but I'll ask it again. Do you all have any questions, any comments about what we're trying to do here? We've thrown the entire elephant at you that you cannot eat with one bite, but I can assure you that as we move along, a lot of these things are going to be reinforced over and over again. I think what we want to leave everybody with is that we're trying to transform the culture of this organization so that we are absolutely focused on quality and safety. The two, as I mentioned earlier, go hand in hand, and this needs to be what we're about. Because our sole reason for being here, if you read in our mission statement, is to serve the people in our community. Otherwise, we need to close the doors, turn the lights out, and go home. So I appreciate you being here this afternoon. I appreciate what you do. Thank you for being engaged in this, and we look forward to what's coming ahead of us. Thanks.